I left the thing on. Sorry. Hope you guys weren't chatting too much. All right, we ready? Okay. Okay.
We approach before the jury comes?
Yes. Tina, hold up. Okay.
During the courtroom, Your Honor. Just may be seated. There's our present accounted for, Your Honor.
Thank you, Deputy. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for returning. Were you all able to abide by my instructions during the recess? Excellent. All right, who's next?
Defense calls Vivian Reeves.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you shall give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Go ahead, Mr. Michaels.
Please state your name.
Vivian Reeves.
Okay. And do you know Curtis Reeves?
Yes,
How do you know Curtis Reeves?
he's my husband.
Now, we've met Matthew and Jennifer. Are those your children?
Yes,
Do you have any other children?
no,
We heard about your grandchild Madison. Any other grandchildren?
just Madison.
Now, how old are you?
75.
And so back in 2014, on January 13th, how old were you?
Couldn't make me do math.
67?
Thank you.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about that. Of 67, how long have you been married to Mr. Reeves?
54 years last October.
So back then, it would have been 46 years.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, during that time, I guess you got married when you were young. Is it fair to say by 2014 you were growing old together?
Yes.
Now, let's talk about some of the things that you've noticed and certainly that your husband noticed about you. On 2014, did you look older than you did when you got married?
Yes.
Did you look older than you did 10 years before that?
Yes.
Now, let's talk about some of the things that you were feeling. Let's talk about your, in terms of looks, let's talk about your arms and hands, okay? Did your arms look the same as they did 10 years before 2014?
No.
Or your hands?
No.
And so, what about I want to say that the quality of your skin, did you bruise more easily around 2014?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
I can hit something and get that dark purple bruise.
Okay. And what about cuts?
My skin is very thin. I have scars from hitting things. Oh, I have scars from when I fell and hit things.
All right, and so back in 2014, that was kind of your state in terms of your skin.
Yes.
Let's talk about your hands. Back in 2014, did you have difficulty performing tasks around the house?
I did.
Okay, such as opening jars, yes or no?
Yes.
All right, and let me ask you, in terms of your hands themselves, did your hands feel stiff, or were you still able to move them like you used to back in 2014?
No, they're stiff.
And did you have pain in your hands?
Yes.
In the morning?
Various times.
Okay. In terms of your breathing back in 2014, did you have difficulty at times breathing?
Yes, I did.
Did you have difficulty at times breathing when you walked up the stairs?
Yes,
And did you go seek treatment for that?
I did.
And were you eventually sent to Moffitt for some
Yes.
treatment? Okay. Now, let's talk about your knees and legs. I saw you limped up here. Were you limping in 2014 or not like that?
Not like this, but I had a problem
Okay, did you have pain in your knees back then?
in one knee.
Okay, and that's something that you addressed through some treatment?
Yes.
Now, you said you fell down. When you fell down, were you in the house?
Yes.
And was your husband Curtis there?
Yes.
And did Mr. Reeves try to pick you up?
One of those times, yes.
Okay, and did he have problems doing that?
He couldn't.
Now, let's talk a little bit about what you noticed about your husband. Again, he looks older than when you married him, right?
Yes.
Would you agree that in the last 10 years before 2014, he's looked older and older?
Yes.
Let me ask you this, has he gained weight since his retirement?
A lot of weight. Yes.
Talking about Mr. Reeves' arm and skin on his arms, did you notice him bruising?
Yes.
Okay, and what sort of things did you see that would cause a bruise around the house?
He used to work, he doesn't now, but he used to work with wood and with metal, and he was always hurting himself or picking up sticks that fell out of the oak trees. His skin would break.
Okay, and so his skin would break, you described, when he would be working in the yard?
Yes.
And did you do anything to try to treat that injury?
Yes, I bought Dermend for bruising. It didn't do very much, but we still use it. And for cuts, It's a powder that burns, I can't think of the name of it, and it wound seal.
And you were using that prior to 2014?
Yes,
Now, let's talk a little bit about, you know what your husband obviously did for a living.
yes.
Now, when he retired, let me ask you this, while he was with the Tampa Police Department, was he a person that always kept very physically fit?
He did,
Okay. And did he run, as far as you knew?
he did,
And at some point, did he stop running?
yes.
Now, he then worked for, your husband worked for Busch Gardens. When he worked for Busch Gardens, did he have to get some kind of special shoes?
He bought better shoes than he was wearing. He got two pair, a black pair and a brown pair. And he had to go and have orthotics made to go in his shoes.
And that was prior to 2014.
Yes,
Was he also receiving some treatment, such as injections in the bottom of his feet?
yes,
And was he also using a TENS machine?
yes.
Now, when he worked around the yard, as he got older, did he wear any sort of brace or any
He
kind
wore
of equipment?
a brace that went all the way around his middle. He's had several. I think one had straps on it, but he's had several different braces.
Now, we're talking before 2014, up to January 13th of 2014. Did you ever notice your husband have difficulty in, for instance, tying his shoes?
Yes,
Okay. Did he have trouble all the time or just sometimes?
just sometimes.
In terms of buttoning his buttons and that sort of thing, would he have trouble sometimes?
Sometimes.
Now, the day that this happened, January 13th, let's talk a little bit about that. On that day, was your husband able to dress himself?
Yes,
Okay. Put on his shirt, all that,
yes,
tie his shoes?
yes.
Okay, did he tie his shoes?
I don't know. I don't think he had shoes that tied.
Okay, and we'll talk about that a little later. And so what were the plans for January 13th?
It happened in the morning. It was not planned ahead. He had returned with my son from a hunting trip.
Your husband?
Yes.
Okay,
And Curtis wanted to go see the movie Lone Survivor because Matt had read the book and then Curtis read it. And it probably originally was going to be just Matt and Curtis, but I wanted to go because it was based on a true story.
all right. And so you decided to go to a matinee, is that right?
Yes.
Why a matinee?
We always went to matinees. I think it's cheaper.
Okay. And so who drives to the movies? Who
Curtis
drives?
drove.
Okay, so it's you and Curtis in the car?
Yes.
And what are the plans in terms of your son, Matt?
He was going to meet us there.
Now, what happens when you get to the theater? There's some places that are right in front. Why did you park in those places? Let me ask you this, did you purposely park far away from the theater, or did you park as close as you could with an open space?
I don't remember.
Okay, do you remember walking from the car to the
Yes, I
theater?
do.
Any problems walking there?
No,
Okay, did Mr. Reeves have any problems walking there?
no.
All right, and so you get to the theater, you get to the window, who pays for the ticket?
Curtis.
All right, and so you buy the tickets at the window, and then you go into the lobby, I would imagine.
Yes.
Okay, what happens once you get into the lobby of the movie theater?
We bought popcorn and one drink.
And the popcorn, was that his, yours?
Both of us.
Okay, you were gonna share it?
Share it.
And before you went in the theater, did you make any other stops?
Yes, I went to the restroom.
Now, when you walk into the theater, do you have any plan on sitting in any certain section of the theater?
No, we generally like to sit in the middle, not all the way up. That's the first time we've done that, but I don't know how to say. In that upper section, probably the middle.
Okay, so not quite all the way where you all sat,
Right,
but somewhere between the front and the back,
yes,
the middle.
yes.
And so when you went in the theater, why didn't you sit in that middle section?
The theater was not full, but people were spaced apart, and we were looking for 3 seats together, and preferably 5, because I like to leave a seat on the edge, if the theater's not full.
All right, and so was the plan to have Curtis Reeves, you in the middle, and then Matt on the end?
Yes.
And then one extra seat on the side, that little
Yes.
room? And so that's how you ended up in the rear of the theater, the back room?
Yes.
Okay. Now, once you get into the theater, are you there before the previews start?
Yes.
Now, as you walk in, now you know it was Mr. Olson and Mrs. Olson. Tell me where they were seated in relation to where you and Curtis Reeves sit, you and your husband Curtis.
Mr. and Mrs. Olson were in the row in front of us. Mr. Olson was in front of me, and Mrs. Olson was in front of Curtis.
Okay. Now, when you went to sit in your seats, do you notice anything about Mr. Olson?
His phone screen is lit. He's doing something on his phone.
Okay, do you know what he was doing?
No, I don't.
Was he talking on the phone?
No, sir. Not that I heard.
And so now you sit down?
Yes.
Okay, who has the popcorn?
Curtis was carrying it, and I took a Ziploc bag from home and just put some in it so I could hold it.
All right, so you're holding your popcorn and Curtis
Yes.
holding his popcorn. Now, you said the previews didn't come on. Do you at some point see a message saying, the movie theater telling people to put away their phones?
Yes, I did.
And once that happens, tell me, is there any sort of conversation or any kind of communication between your husband and Mr. Olson?
Yes, Curtis leaned forward toward Mr. Olson, and he spoke so softly. I don't know. I thought that I heard the word phone, but I cannot be sure.
And would you say, did you hear really either one of them talk except for maybe the word phone?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you didn't hear either one of them? In other
Oh,
words,
no.
you didn't hear your
I heard-
husband? Did you hear your husband?
I know. I couldn't hear him.
Okay.
Maybe I heard the word phone,
Okay.
but I'm not certain.
All right. And so they were both speaking in lower tones, is that fair to say?
No.
Okay, tell me what you mean by that.
Mr. Olson very loudly said,
Well, we're going to get there. So first what happens
Okay.
is Curtis leans forward and you hear some soft conversation.
yes,
You don't know who spoke first, do you?
Curtis did.
And then you hear something, the word phone. That's what you described,
Yes.
something like that. Okay. And then after that, what happens?
Mr. Olson responded in a very loud and ugly voice.
Okay, now, you don't have to say the word, but describe what he said. Did he use the F word?
Yes, he did.
What do you remember him saying?
He used the F word, and he's texting his daughter.
Do you know that he said texting, or do you just remember that he said the word daughter?
I'm not certain.
Now, at that point, were the previews on?
Yes.
And were you able to hear Mr. Olson's voice over the previews?
Oh, yes.
Were the previews, was Mr. Olson's voice then louder than the previews?
It was loud. It was louder than the previews.
Now, was it possible that the trailers were playing? In other
Yeah.
words, okay,
Yes,
that's the same as previews to you.
previews.
Now, let me ask you this, when you heard that response from Mr. Olson, how did it make you feel?
It scared me. I've never.
Objection, relevance.
Sustained.
Okay, so let's take out that it scared you. You heard that, those words, and tell me then, What happened next?
I don't know what period of time, short time, Curtis handed me his he stood up, he handed me his popcorn and stood up and said, "I'm going to get the manager."
All right, now when you saw your husband stand up and to go to get the manager, at that point, had Mr. Olson turned around at all, or you're just hearing him?
I'm just hearing him.
Now your husband gets up, tells you he's going to get the manager. Do you say anything to your husband?
I said, "Let's just move."
Do you know if your husband heard you or not?
I don't.
Did he respond to you at all?
No.
Did he say, "We're not going to move"?
No.
You've known your husband for almost 50 years at that point, now over 50 years. Did your husband appear to be angry to you?
No.
Was he mumbling at all?
No.
Now tell me what you saw your husband do. He got up, you described, and then what happened?
And then he slowly felt his way down the aisle.
Okay, and as your husband leaves, do you watch him leave, or this time are you watching the screen?
I was not looking at Mr. Olson. I was either looking to his right side. I saw the screen, but I couldn't tell you what was on the screen. I didn't want to be there.
Okay, and so is there a reason why you just didn't get up and move?
Well, Curtis had texted Matt, I think, where we were sitting. And I thought about getting up, but I didn't.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Do you agree or disagree with me that you were expecting your son to come in any minute and sit next to you?
Yes,
Now, when your husband left, I guess at some point, does he come back?
yes.
Now, once your husband comes back, tell me what happened. Is there some kind of conversation between your husband and Mr. Olson in front of him?
Yes, but something happens before that.
Tell me about it.
Curtis sits down and takes his popcorn from me.
Okay, so when Curtis Reeves comes back, your husband, he passes in front of you,
Yes,
and when he passes in front of you, does he say anything to you?
no,
Again, do you hear him grumbling in any way?
no,
And when he passes you, he takes back the popcorn, is that what you described?
right,
Okay, and then you described that he sits down again to your left.
yes,
Because I forgot to ask you that, your husband is seated to your left.
yes.
Now, once your husband sits down, does something happen?
He leans forward and.
Your husband,
Yes.
okay? And do you hear anything that your husband said?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Do you agree or disagree with me that you observed both men speaking, Mr. Olson and your husband?
Yes.
Do you know who spoke first?
I'm not sure.
And that's fair, so if you don't know who spoke first, you don't know who spoke first, right?
Right.
So do you know who spoke first?
Objection
I
has been
don't.
answered.
Sustained.
Now, did you hear Mr. Olson say anything in response to your husband leaning forward?
Objection, hearsay.
It's not for the truth of the matter, sir. May we approach you?
Yes, approach.
Did you hear Mr. Olson say something at that point?
Yes.
What did he say?
Something to the effect of, "You told on me only he said the word, 'Do you think you are?'"
Now, at that point, were the previews on?
Yes.
And was this loud enough for you to hear?
Oh, yes.
Now, at that point, was Mr. Olson seated still, or had he turned around?
This all happened very quickly. It's hard to take it a piece at a time. He did stand up and
Well,
turn
we're
around.
gonna talk about that. So, in terms of when Mr. Olson said that, do you remember whether he was sitting or standing up?
I'm not sure.
Now, at some point, does Mr. Olson stand up?
Oh, yes, very quickly.
And when he stands up, does he turn around?
Yes,
And when you say turn around, he's right in front of you.
yes,
Is that right?
yes.
And when he turns around, is he facing you?
He's leaning towards Curtis.
Okay. So he's right in front of you, you're saying, and leaning towards your husband.
Yes.
Yeah, excuse me. I'm going to object to the constant summing up of the testimony. We've let it go a couple of times, but now we're into some critical testimony, so I object to the summation of the testimony by counsel.
Your Honor, just putting it into context, certainly I'm not asking the same question again.
No, he's gratuitously.
Can we approach, Your Honor? Now, once Mr. Olson stood up, what is the next thing you observe Mr. Olson do?
He leans towards Curtis. It seemed like his whole upper body was leaning towards Curtis.
And when you observe that motion, how did it make you feel in terms of what it looked like to you?
I thought he was coming over, and it just freaked me out. I was terrified.
You thought that Mr. Olson was coming over the seat?
I did.
And so what happened when you saw that?
I briefly saw Curtis lean back, or
Okay,
lean,
let's talk about that.
okay,
You see Mr. Olson now leaning over the seat,
yes,
and do you, at that point, look at your husband?
briefly, because he moved.
And tell me what you mean, your husband moved?
I could see that his body was moving
Moving in which direction?
towards the left.
Okay, and you're kind of leaning back as well. Is that what you're trying to describe here?
Yes,
Okay, so you see, after your husband leans back and to his left, do you see your husband's leg at all?
I think his leg was stretched out.
His right leg?
Yes,
And do you see your husband reaching for his pistol?
I do not.
Certainly you knew that your husband probably had one, right?
He normally did, but I never even, it's not something I thought about.
Did your husband announce it to you? I'm taking my pistol or anything like that?
No,
Now, you see, once your husband leans back, stretches out his leg, do you see Mr. Olson doing anything more to your husband?
I either closed my eyes or turned to the right.
Do you see Mr. Olson going back over his seat then again?
No,
Do you see Mr. Olson reaching over the seat again?
no,
Do you see Mr. Olson grabbing the popcorn from your husband's hand?
not personally. The only place I saw that was on the video.
Okay, so when you were in the theater, did you see that?
No,
Did you see Mr. Olson bringing back the popcorn?
no,
Did you see Mr. Olson then move forward with it
no,
and throw it in your husband's face?
no,
Did you see the shot?
no,
Did you hear it?
yes.
What happened once you saw the shot? What did you do?
At some point, I moved a couple of seats away, but I couldn't do that until people got up and moved.
And what was your emotional state at that point?
I didn't know what happened, and I couldn't believe it. I was never been that scared before in all my life.
Now, were you scared because of Mr. Olson coming towards your husband?
That's when it started.
Now, did you look over at your husband after the shot? was fired?
Eventually,
Okay. Did you see him touching his face or doing anything with
he
his
had
hands?
his hands up to this area.
Did you look on the ground and see anything?
I did.
What did you see?
I saw a cell phone and popcorn.
And where was his cell phone located?
It was between Curtis's feet. It wasn't the picture that I've seen. It wasn't that close. Like if this was the ledge, in the pictures I've seen, it looked pretty close, but it was further back when I saw it.
Okay. And so when you took a look at that, did you know whose phone that was?
This was stupid because Curtis didn't have his phone out, but I didn't think anybody else's phone would be there, so I thought it was his.
Now, did you see your husband get hit with anything
I didn't.
or get punched?
No.
But after Mr. Olson leaned over the seat as you described the first time, agree or disagree with me, you, aside from seeing your husband move in his seat, you didn't see anything else? Agree or disagree?
All right, I'll overrule.
Agree or disagree, you didn't see anything else after that?
No.
Now, at some point, do you see your son in the theater?
Yes, but yes, I did.
Okay.
Coming down I think he was in our row.
All right. And does he take you out of the theater?
Not then. He had blood on his hands and his clothes.
And so did he leave and come back?
Yes, he said, let me get cleaned up.
Now, does he come back into the theater to get you?
He does.
And where do you go from there?
We went to the little tables by the concession stand.
And what happens while you're there?
I thought that Matt went out again, but I'm not. But people started coming out of the theater and sitting at those tables and talking.
Did you hear them talking about, without telling me what they were saying, what was going on?
I do not remember what they were saying. I was so upset that I don't know what they were saying.
So at some point, do you speak to police?
Yes,
Do you know how many you spoke to?
I talked to Detective Smith, I think, and then two detectives interviewed me and recorded it, but there were people coming in and out.
Okay.
When I say people, I meant sheriff's deputies.
So you spoke to one detective, I guess? Verbal, speaking to him?
Yes,
That wasn't recorded.
right,
Then you spoke to another one that was recorded.
yes.
The one you spoke to, did you tell that particular detective that you didn't know who said the F word?
No, I didn't. I knew who said it.
Did you, tell them that you told your husband that you wanted to move and he refused to move,
No,
to move seats?
no.
approach the clerk, please?
You may.
May I have State's Exhibit 50, please? May I approach the witness?
You may.
Mrs. Reeves, I'm showing you what's been marked State Exhibits 60. Do you remember that?
I do,
Do you recognize that shoe?
yes.
And how do you recognize that shoe?
That's the kind of shoe that Curtis wore that didn't tie.
Well, let's talk about that. Is that the shoe he was wearing that day?
I assume it is,
Okay. Is that the type and
Yes.
brand?
the brand.
Is that his size?
Yes,
Now, let's look at these laces. Are these laces that you have to tie?
no. They were just like, their shoes were just like my granddaughter's.
Nothing further, thank you.
Thank you. Cross?
Yes, Your Honor. Do we have a moment, Judge?
You may.
We have just a moment, Your Honor.
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor.
May it please the court, counsel, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Mrs. Olson, Mrs. Reeves, good morning.
yes, sir.
If I ask you a question that you don't understand, just let me know, okay?
Thank you.
All right. Now, Mrs. Reeves, as you walked to your seats, you in fact saw Mr. Olson on his cell phone, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And there were no previews playing at that time?
No.
As you sat down, did you see him with his phone out?
Once I sat down, he was so tall. No, I did not see it.
Okay. Did you see the light emitting from the phone?
No. Not after I sat.
Okay. He wasn't talking on the phone though, correct?
Not that I heard.
All right. And you indicated previously that you were sitting behind Mr. Olson, correct?
Correct.
And the defendant was sitting behind Mrs. Olson?
Yes, sir.
And you would agree with me that y'all were in a very small confined space,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
The defendant, your husband, was right next to you.
Yes.
Mr. and Mrs. Olson were 2 to 3 feet away from you, correct?
Yes.
There was a point in time when the defendant made contact with Mr. Olson, correct?
Verbal.
Okay. And is that after the screen showed or said, hey, put your phones away?
Yes, sir.
All right, you would agree with me that the defendant, your husband, initiated the contact with Mr. Olson?
Yes.
And in fact, you couldn't hear what was being said, correct?
I could not hear my husband. I feel like I heard the word phone, but I can't be sure.
All right, you're not sure, are you?
No, sir.
You would agree with me that during the conversation that the defendant had with Mr. Olson, he never turned around in his seat, right?
Right.
In fact, you were looking at the back of his head the whole time.
I was trying not to look at him, Mr. Garcia. Or
Okay. When your husband and Mr. Olson had these conversations, Mr. Olson's face was facing the screen, right?
As far as I know.
All right. In fact, you never saw his face.
Right.
He never turned around during that sequence of events, did he?
That's correct.
He never placed his arms, legs, or anything over the back of the seat at that time, correct?
Not at that time.
Okay. Did you ever hear any words of violence directed to the defendant, in this case, your husband, Mr. Reeves?
I didn't.
And you were right there, right?
Yes, sir.
You would agree with me that Mr. Olson never made any movements towards the defendant, correct? At that time?
At that time. That's correct.
You would agree with me there comes a time that the defendant says, I'm going to see the manager,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
He gets up and leaves.
Yes.
Now, you indicated you were afraid, right? You were scared.
I was scared when Mr. Olson said what he said.
Okay.
When my husband left, I was more ticked off that this was happening.
Okay.
I
You
was
would agree?
I was uncomfortable.
All right, you're uncomfortable, you're scared. You would agree with me that you had every opportunity. You could have left and gone with your husband, right?
I could have.
You didn't, though.
No, we expected my son to come there.
Okay. And in fact, during the time that the defendant had gone to the manager, Mr. Olson never said one word to you, did he?
No, sir.
He never turned around in his seat.
No.
He didn't have the phone out, correct?
I don't know. I couldn't see.
All right. He wasn't rude to you.
No.
In fact, he didn't say one word to you that whole time.
Right.
Mr. Reeves, the defendant comes back, correct?
Correct.
You would agree with me that he initiates contact with Mr. Olson again?
After he sits down and takes his popcorn, yes.
Okay. The 3 times that he has contact with Mr. Olson, your husband, the defendant, initiated that contact, correct?
Sir, I don't remember but 2, and Curtis initiated them.
Okay. Well, let's go through them. You remember the first one, right? About
Yes.
putting the phone away.
Yes.
There's a second initiation when he says to him, I'm going to the manager. That's number 2.
I don't remember that.
You don't recall that?
I don't.
And then the third would be when he comes back from the manager's office and he sits down and he made a statement to him, right?
That's right.
Do you remember what he said?
What Curtis said,
Yes, ma'am.
I couldn't hear him.
You didn't hear it at all?
No,
You have no idea what he said?
no,
Okay. Up until that point in time, you didn't hear any threats from Mr. Olson, did you?
no, sir.
And again, to clarify, prior to him coming back from the manager's office, Mr. Olson never turned in his chair to face the defendant.
As far as I know, no.
Now, you would agree with me that the defendant, your husband, sits down, right?
Yes, sir.
And you said he had gotten the popcorn from you.
Yes,
And at some point in time, you said that he's leaning to his left, correct?
correct.
With his right leg extended.
Yes, sir.
Now, you would agree with me, would you not? You knew that Mr. Reeves, the defendant, had a pistol in his pocket.
I actually did not know that.
You would agree with me that every time Mr. Reeves, the defendant, went out, he had a pistol. He was always carrying a pistol.
I never asked.
You-
Based on my life experience with him, I assume he carried a pistol, but I never saw it, I never asked, we didn't talk about it.
Okay. But you assumed because he always carried it, correct?
I wasn't really assuming, but okay,
Well, you said, you used the word, "I assumed."
okay. Based on my life's experience, I'll assume he had a pistol.
All right, well, let me ask you this. He never left the home without either a pistol or a revolver in his pocket, correct?
I don't know that. There are some places that you can't take a gun in, and I don't know, for instance, I don't know whether he took one to church or not.
Okay. All right, so you see the defendant, your husband, leaning back, correct?
Yeah, it
To his
was
left?
just a brief glance.
All right. And you see his right leg out.
Yes, sir.
And you said you saw, at this point, you see Mr. Olson standing,
Yes.
right? Did you ever see him hit the defendant?
No.
Did you
Okay, I'm sorry.
ever hear a slap or hit? You hear skin on skin, something loud like if someone had been punched.
No, sir.
Did you see him throw a phone?
No, sir.
Did you see him throw anything?
No. Believe, I wish I had. I just couldn't handle it.
Your Honor, I'm going to ask that her last statements be stricken as gratuitous and not responsive to a question. It's the second time.
All right, I'll overrule now, but let's just answer the question, please.
So never saw any type of object thrown towards the defendant in this case, correct?
No, sir.
And as the defendant, your husband, is leaning to his left and with his right leg out, you never heard him saying, "No, no, no, whoa, whoa, whoa," did you?
No, sir.
In fact, you never saw his left hand out, did you?
I just glanced briefly when my husband started to move, and I thought he was trying to get away. I wasn't just staring at him.
You would agree with me, this was all happening right in front of you,
Yes,
correct?
sir. Yes, sir, but it was very fast.
May I have a moment, Judge?
You may.
Mrs. Reeves, you indicated that you closed your eyes, correct?
I don't know if I turned away or closed my eyes, but I didn't see anything else.
Okay. Now, going back, you indicated you saw Mr. Olson standing up, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you indicated that you had seen your husband leaning to his left with his right leg out, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, do you agree being in a previous hearing?
Yes, I was at Stand Your Ground.
Page 709, line 4. Do you recall this question being asked of you? Did you see anything after Mr. Olson was lunging over the seat coming after Curtis? And your answer, no, I wish I had.
I don't remember that specifically, but I know that when Curtis moved,
Well,
I took a brief glance, and then after he came over, no, I don't know another thing until after the gunshot.
okay. So you would agree with me that in this previous hearing, you never said anything about him leaning to his left and extending his right leg, did you?
I don't know. I don't remember.
Okay. Well, you would agree with me that you said, no, I wish I had. Correct?
Yes, sir.
May I have a moment, Judge?
You may.
With me that this is the first time we heard you state that you saw him leaning to his left with his right leg out in front of him, correct?
No, sir.
Okay. Judge, may I approach the witness, please?
Yes.
Mrs. Reeves, I'm going to ask that you read silently to yourself
Here.
these lines here. Yes, yes, ma'am.
Page, Mr. Garcia.
Page 709, starting at line 4.
What is this from?
It's just from a previous hearing.
Okay.
May we approach briefly?
Yeah, can we?
Yes. thank you. You may. Okay, you can bring him back. Okay.
Thank you. Ready for the jury, Your Honor?
Yep.
Jurors in the courtroom.
Okay.
Jurors may be seated. All jurors are present and accounted for.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I know you had a very brief break, but were you all able to abide by my instructions during the recess? Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Garcia.
Judge, may I approach the witness, please?
You may.
So, Mrs. Reeves, you had an opportunity to read that question,
Yes, sir.
and you would agree with me that it was asked after Mr. Olson stood up, and you said,
After he lunged.
right, coming after Curtis, that you did not see anything.
It kind of happened at the same time.
Well, you would agree with me that your answer was, no, I wish I had, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Your Honor, I would ask the court to direct the prosecutor to page 754 of the same hearing, lines 14 through 17.
Okay.
Perhaps he can give that to the witness to read that and ask her questions concerning that, or if he's done, I'll be happy to.
Okay.
What was the lines again, Mr. Michael?
If the court can have the prosecutor read page 754, lines 14 through 17 to the jury. Actually, can go all the way down to the bottom of the page, page 25. Line 25. So page 754, lines 14 through 25. Same proceeding.
May I approach the witness, Judge?
You may.
For the record, referring to page 754, lines 14 through 17. Mrs. Reeves, I ask that you read lines 14 through 17 to yourself, please.
Right here, where the,
25,
oh, 14, I've got it.
Completeness, he needs to read it.
or you can do so on cross.
If, starting on line 14, this question, and then your answer.
Or on redirect, sorry.
But it was improper impeachment under the doctrine of completeness, he needs to read it right then and there.
I see that.
Okay. All right, do you remember being asked this question? You saw Mr. Reeves kind of, lean over on his left butt cheek, stretch his leg out. Did you see that? Answer, no, leaned way back. Yes.
I'm sorry, he says he leaned way back, yes to the left.
No, no.
He leaned way back, yes to the left. Correct? That's what you said?
Yes, he leaned back and to the left.
All right. You would agree with me in the same here, and you made two contradictory statements, correct?
I don't see the contradiction.
Earlier, you said you wish you had seen it. Later on, you're saying you saw it.
No, I wish I had seen the popcorn thrown and the phone and things like that.
Okay, the question before you back then, there was nothing about popcorn being thrown and the phone. That wasn't the question that was posed to you. Correct?
You did ask me that. Okay, I'm out of context.
All right. But you would agree with me you gave two contradicting statements.
No, I don't agree.
Okay. Earlier, you said you wish you had seen it. Now here, you're saying you saw him lean to his left.
When I said I wish I had seen it, I was not talking about him leaning. I wish I had
You-
seen everything.
All right. The question was, when you saw Mr. Olson stand, you never mentioned anything about Mr. Reeves, the defendant, leaning to his left and stretching out his right leg, correct?
I don't know.
Objection, Your Honor, that's an improper characterization. He just asked, in answer to the question, did you see Mr. Reeves lean to his left and stretch out his leg? And certainly.
Do you want to approach, or shall we just?
Mrs. Reeves, did you at any time ever see Mr. Olson in your aisle?
No,
Completely over in your
No.
aisle? Correct?
correct.
You never saw him climbing over a chair either, did you?
No, sir.
I have no further questions, Judge.
Read it right?
Thank you. Never saw Mr. Olson climbing over his seat into the aisle. That's what you testified to.
Yes,
Did you see him leaning over the chair with his upper body coming into the aisle
yes,
towards you and your husband?
yes.
Now, the prosecutor talked to you and you said he's trying to get away. When you said he's trying to get away, were you talking about your husband?
Yes, I thought that's why he was leaning so far back.
And did it appear to you that he, your husband, was trying to get away from Mr. Olson coming over the chair?
That's what I thought, yes.
Thank you.
May this witness be excused?
Your Honor, we have her under subpoena, so we will reserve her.
All right,
We have our understanding.
okay. You are free to have a seat, but you need to,
Thank you.
if you're called back, you have to come. Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and take a lunch break. If you would, remember my instructions during the recess. Do not do any independent research or discuss the facts of the case amongst yourselves or with anyone else. I'm going to let you come back at 1 o'clock and just report back to the jury pool room. Thank you.
All right, for the recess till 1 o'clock lunch.
All right.